welcome. Thanks for joining me. This is just for everyone watching. Ciaran and I recently had a discussion, and he brought up quite a lot of what I thought were quite interesting points around vaccinations and where we're going. So this is going to be a really short video. The whole aim here is just to help leaders right now and HR managers and everyone involved that potentially could be involved in deciding whether or not vaccinations and what does vaccination look like for the workplace in the near future. This is just hopefully give you a bit of clarity and hopefully help you stop you from making some potentially disastrous mistakes, RE law. So to begin with, mate, these COVID-19 vaccines, it looks like we've got a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, which is great. I think many of us are hopeful of this. But I mean, what's the current situation right now with what we know in regards to COVID-19 and vaccinations here in Australia?
Yeah, so this is a really good question because we're getting a lot of currently in Australia, unfortunately, and there's no agenda here, and I don't think anyone's to blame, but unfortunately, we're just getting a little bit too smaller pieces of the puzzle. We're not really getting a good, concise overview of what's going on. So, just very quickly to address your question in that context. What happened was when COVID-19 came out, we as a planet only had one option. And for those that aren't aware, every strategy that pretty much the Australian government adopts mirrors other countries because the primary source of info, research and recommendation comes out from an authority called the World Health Organization, or WHO. And the only strategy that the WHO recommended, and in turn we implemented, was one of slowing down the virus. So everything we've been doing in this country to date is designed to slow it down. And that's because the preferred option wasn't on the table, which is eradication. And of course, what is the entire world, and particularly WHO, has been working toward whilst we're slowing it down, it was a vaccine. And the vaccine is the primary way of eradication. So what's happened is we as a country now, and I'm going to use a word that everyone's using because why not, we're about to pivot from slowing the virus down to one of eradication. And it's really important contextually as a country and an economy to understand why that we have to do it, is because slowing down doesn't stop anything. And in particular, it's not sustainable. And whether you're an economist or you're a work health and safety professional, particularly with that medical scientist that has been researching COVID-19, if we didn't take appropriate steps to slow down, we would have faced, and this is the exact terminology that they're using, decimation as an economy. Both people would have been decimated, in addition to economically, we would have just lost huge amounts of GDP. So that's worked to an extent. Now we have to pivot to eradication, and that's where the vaccinations come in. And in January, so less than a month ago, the Australian government released its vaccine strategy. And in there, they identified workers that are prioritised. Not workers, people that are prioritised and people that aren't. But when you add up all the figures, you don't have to be a mathematician or an expert. You can see they're looking at immunising the entire country. Unfortunately, and potentially fortunately as well, because it is bringing the conversation forward, is that there's been a lot of discussion around, can you direct a worker to be vaccinated as a part of that national strategy? So that's what we're going to, I guess, discuss a little bit more. But there's some good context, Anthony, for why they're important and why we're doing it.
Okay. So it sounds to me a little bit, it kind of might get folded into our measles, mumps, rubella kind of thing when you're a kid. Everybody gets vaccinated against that. Is that kind of what we're looking at, like a broad scale immunisation strategy across the whole country?
Definitely. And this is where, unfortunately, there is a huge blank, and the blank isn't, and I'm trying not to be political here, but the blank isn't due to our government, it's due to WHO, saying that because we haven't rolled this out, vaccines on large scale yet, we can't actually pick, and this is the term you're going to be hearing a lot more of over the coming months, we can't actually define what is the percentage we need to hit for what we call herd immunity, and in turn eradication. What we can delineate from the research from WHO on previous campaigns of eradication with pandemics that have worked is polio. They had to achieve 80% herd immunity worldwide for it to be eradicated. In addition to, what was the other one? SARS. SARS had to be 90% herd immunity. So that required vaccinations for both for it to be eradicated. Now, what they have also said is two other key bits of data. You can never vaccinate 100% of the population. The reason for that is due to what's called medical exemptions. So I have another illness, injury, or complication medical, which means if I get vaccinated, I'll be worse off. I could die or have issues. But the medical profession, and in turn who, are going to have to define that list, which is blank at the moment. Additionally, because again the vaccination hasn't been tested on wide scale, they've said we need more data before we can actually confirm what target we need to aim at for herd immunity.
Okay, so we're going to need, sounds to me like 9 out of 10 people, but we don't really know.
If I was a betting man, I would say it's got to be 8 to 9. And sorry, there was one other figure I needed to mention, and this has also come from WHO in relation to COVID-19. The smallest percentage of population you need before you can decimate an economy, so kill a lot of people as well as financially wreck it, and in turn, the remainder of the population getting infected is less than 10%.
Right.
So you do the maths there between 80 and 90% for herd immunity versus those that can't be immunised versus the percentage you need for COVID-19 infects 100% of the population. There's not much wriggle room between 90%.
Yeah. Now, that's at a national level, at an entire population level. If you dial that down to individual businesses right now, I'm sure there are many HR and leaders, just business leaders as well, sitting there going, well, I want my workforce vaccinated because we want to get back to work. By the way, we don't want to be decimated, right? Potentially by some kind of outbreak. So I'm guessing they're going to be quite enthusiastic about the idea of getting people vaccinated. Should they? Well,
all right. So this is a very good question. Now, what I recommend is they have to work through a process before they reach that decision. You're going to have to basically assemble enough pieces of the puzzle so you can then decide on what to do. Fortunately, I'm going to help you step through that right now, that decision processing. And I'm even going to go as far as to answer your question and make a recommendation at the end of who you can probably direct be vaccinated as an employee, and those who my recommendation is don't direct them, just ask them to volunteer until WHO and the government make a decision. I'm just going to predicate that recommendation under this statistic. Currently in our country, and the latest data I can only access is 2016, because that was the last time we did a detailed survey. Basically, only 42% of our population works, right? So we're obviously already talking about we need 80 to 90% vaccine for this to work, or inoculated, or vaccinated. So really, the question here is beyond that of employers, and it should be raised at a government level. So you're going to have to direct everyone. In addition to that, out of that 42%, you've got to minus those that are going to have medical exemptions. And arguably, a percentage of that are going to be volunteers anyway, because they're contractors or self-employed. So the issue is bigger than employers. And if you're uncomfortable directing an employee, after I work through this scenario with you, I would simply be advocating through whomever you were a member of as an employer, so employer groups, state chambers and so on. The government needs to make a decision on this once WHO has recommended that herd immunity target. All right. Okay, so sorry, Anthony, are you happy for me to work through a scenario?
Yeah, okay, let's go through the scenario. I'm just working through it in my own head as well. It's going to be... So it sounds to me, I mean, what you're essentially saying is right now there might be organisations out there that are sitting there thinking, well, we're going to mandate vaccinations for our people.
Definitely,
right?
Yep.
And what you're saying is, okay, we'll just hold your horses. Is that the key message here?
I would say if you decide that you don't want to vaccinate your employees at the end of this process or make it compulsory, that would be the reason I would be waiting for. However, because we're in a democratic system and we've got avenues to lobby and implement change at a legislative level, that's what I'm saying to everyone they should be doing. Every employer out there is a member of some sort of employer group who has people paid literally millions of dollars a year to work to walk the corridors of power in Parliament House and say to them, well, we want the Fair Work Act amended and so on. So use those channels right now to be openly advocating and saying, even if we were going to mandate this, there's still no guarantee we're going to eradicate. The last bit of information I did get to yesterday was that Australia has purchased 150 million vials of vaccination. Our population's only roughly about 25 million, so we can do people 6 times over. What I was told out of that when I said, why do we need so much, was even if people get a course of up to 6 injections, the current test data, and it's due to the what they call slippery nature of the virus, is that people may still only be 60% immune to the virus. Okay, so that's another thing to factor into your decision-making tool. But the main thing that I'm just going to say here, going on to a scenario, is 2 bits of legislation people are going to have to factor in here. One is Work Health and Safety Act, and what act is applicable to you in your state or territory. And basically, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your employees to provide a safe working environment. And it's under that one-liner that employers right now and HR managers are saying, do we get these guys vaccinated or not?
Right.
In order to justify that course of action, you need data to substantiate that. And there is plenty. So the first reference that I'm going to put people to is the national strategy. I suppose we can put a link in descriptions in regard.
We'll put links in. Mm-hmm.
And that actually has the phase rolled out, and they actually define in there the government frontline workers. So I'm going to tell you right now, it includes police services and aged care workers. The second group in there that your own in-house risk assessment should be identifying is any industries where their environment can prolong or exacerbate the exposure to the virus. So, for instance, the meatpacking industry, anyone who works in a cooler room for an extended period of time is definitely working in a COVID-19 hazard environment, because the medical information coming out has shown that the virus can stay alive in a cold environment of that nature of up to 3 hours. And that's why there was huge breakouts in Victoria of that. The second one is they've shown that in ships, it's due to the air circulation on that greatly accelerated the airborne nature of the virus, so people on ships got infected. So if you've got an industry where you're showing that there is specific hazards and there's data to support exposure, prolonged exposure or anything like that, I would be saying, in addition to that government database there, is that when the vaccine's available, and they're saying it could already be available as early as this month, February, yes, you could probably mandate that. Right. The second bit that we've got to factor in is the Fair Work Act and the unfair dismissal process. And this is really important, what I'm going to say here, because a lot of people will take that previous recommendation as good. I'm going to tell an employee to do it or else. Right. You have to go through a due process in the Act before you dismiss anyone. And it doesn't matter, and there are some extreme examples where people definitely should have been terminated, and I won't go into the details of those, but they were reinstated because no due process was followed. All right. So I'll work through one example for someone. Let's say they're a frontline worker. You've got the evidence to support your justification in your eyes that they need to be vaccinated, and that employee says, no, I'm not going to do it. You have to look at redeployment first. If you're a large organisation with a large diverse workforce, there may be other employment opportunities where you can move them elsewhere and they're no longer exposed to that hazard or being a frontline worker. Okay, so there's all these other options in there. Additionally, there is no clear guidance that I've been able to find from WHO as to who qualifies as medical exemption right now. Doctors obviously will probably make a decision on that based on their own expertise, but the whole point there is all these processes you need to go through with your employees first. And additionally, this is where I see a lot of large-scale issues come up with, whether it's Privacy Act and dismissal or it's breach of workers' rights and so on, is that organisations fail to manage the process. And there's been a lot of really good articles by ARI and other organisations talking about it. Start your conversations now. And that's the first bit that I'll say, whether you have someone that you've identified and can substantiate as a frontline worker, or you don't. So you're talking about someone that has efficient treatments in place right now, or forms of mitigation or controls to minimise the spread, and they're, say, an accountant working from home, doesn't really matter. Have the conversations right now to say, this is why it's really important, because we as a nation will continue to suffer economically if we don't get enough volunteers straight off. And this represents a worldwide changing strategy from slowing the virus down to eradication. Okay, so it's all about expediting that recovery, and that's what needs to happen right now. You don't need to even make that determination if you're uncomfortable about making the vaccination compulsory or not. You should already be getting your head around the strategy, the worldwide strategy, and in turn the government strategy, why that's important, why they're looking at everyone, hopefully once they pick that herd immunity target, everyone jumping on board and volunteering. and so
Got
on,
it.
and explain the change in strategy. Yeah.
So essentially, to reverse engineer that, one, start having the conversations with everyone now, and
Yes.
don't just surprise people with this kind of with the news. The second one is really need to figure out who is eligible, or who qualifies as someone you could mandate that they should do that. They should be
Who's
vaccinated.
exposed?
Yeah.
Who's exposed, and have you got references to support that?
Right. But then the next part then is, well, but hang on a minute. There's the fair work considerations. So if you are going to mandate it also, and they say no, well, then you need to be able to think about redeployment on this, instead of just saying, well, this is your job, this is what you need to do. You have to do it. And then maybe saying, well, then you can't work here anymore. And then you might have an issue on your hands. You might have a fair work case on your hands. Is that?
That's right. If you don't follow due process and look at all your options, and redeployment is just one of several that they have to evaluate, in addition to substantial evidence, agreement to change the contract of employment by the employee, and so on. There's a huge list, and that's what I call due process. If you fail due process and you can't prove that in an unfair dismissal claim, which only costs an employee about $74 to submit, and you've got 21 days to respond, if you fail to show your evidence to substantiate your decision to terminate an employee's employment contract or terminate their employment, then you can be up for fines. You can be up for all sorts of things.
So you just said evidence, but I think if 2020 has shown us anything, is that people are pulling evidence out of thin air and from all over the place. So not all evidence is equal. So what qualifies as good evidence in this kind of scenario?
So if you were to say to me, Ciaran, we are looking at mandating it, what would you consider as due process and satisfying the burden of proof should we unfortunately have to terminate an employee that disagrees with our way forward? It's a lot of those references that I've just cited. So you've got substantial references to show that if they don't get vaccinated, they are unnecessarily exposed, and we as the employer or manager have not fulfilled our fiduciary responsibility by ensuring they are vaccinated. So frontline workers, because they are exposed to potentially people who may have that infection. Health workers would be one.
Yep.
Anywhere where there's been an industry breakout and there's medical evidence to support that environment they were in, exacerbated the way it was spread, including its life expectancy. So that's all your evidence. And it's the old, you could basically apply university AQF 9 or 10, so masters or a PhD type crap test, credible, reliable, authoritative source. What's the P stand for? Anyway, and published, I think is the P. So it's got to stand up. So I'm on distribution lists for people that advise the government on medical developments for vaccines and for so on. Distribution lists with associations and so on. Now, what I will say too, just lastly, is there is no COVID-19 unfair dismissal case to reference right now. Right.
So no precedent is what you're saying.
There's no precedent for COVID-19. And as far as I can find, there is no precedent for SARS, for unfair dismissal in Australia. SARS is the disease that the COVID-19 belongs to family-wise. A lot of people are citing two very old cases, and one wasn't even a decision. It was one that looked like a recommendation, but it didn't go through, and one was a 2009 case for the flu. I wouldn't be referencing them as precedents for several reasons. We don't shut down an entire economy for a flu vac around. One of them. Okay, so the circumstances are very different. Plus, in 2009, we arguably didn't even have a standard benchmark for a safety professional. We do since 2016. And they carry a lot more weight now, particularly in prosecutions where process hasn't been followed. And say an engineer did a safety risk assessment and a bridge fell down. Well, the DPP now pulls in safety experts to say that person was actually not qualified in safety and so on.
Gotcha.
So the legal environment is very different.
All right. So there's quite a few things for businesses to think about right now, but it also occurs to me that there's a lot of unknowns right now, especially from the governments, in terms of the information the government's providing. So, I mean, obviously businesses are going to be looking for direction. Somehow we need to get to this 80, 90% or whatever this vaccination level will be.
We're guessing it's going to be that when it's announced.
Yeah. So what does the government right now need to do to make this
They need to
easier for
make
business.
They need to make a decision. Yeah, this should not be left up to employers,
Right.
which only represent 42% of the entire country. So it's less than half. And even then, that's, if you're a contractor or self-employed, it's going to be less again. There's going to be exemptions. They're going to have to announce and make it, make a decision. But I can understand where they're coming from. They're waiting to hear what WHO determines as an acceptable herd immunity target.
Yeah. This is going to evolve. This isn't it. This is going to continue to evolve. So it's a bit of a watch this space situation as information comes to light, as it has been from the very beginning. So right now, is there anything else on that you would point employers to consider right now?
The main thing is refamiliarise yourself with the unfair dismissal process. Remember, the burden of proof will be on you if you have to represent. Refamiliarise yourself with your risk treatments. Start the conversations and do a bit of research on that national strategy and get some information from the source, which is WHO.
Right.
Okay, you got to remember, everyone else between WHO and us is doing their own version of reinterpretation. So it doesn't hurt right from the get-go to get that information from the source and understanding some of the context behind it. So we are changing as a planet with our strategy. Start having those conversations with your staff. So you start to get a lot of buy-in, really. A lot of staff saying, yeah, I want to volunteer.
And just to clarify, WHO means World Health Organization. So just in case people are sitting there going, there's this mystery person that's apparently got all the answers. So from there on, like, okay, if you were in this situation right now as a business owner, because we've just gone over there's a lot of information, and I'm sitting here trying to process it, and I'm sitting there going, wow, there seems to be a lot more unknown. Look, the stakes are high. Sounds like we need to get onto this as soon as possible. But at the same time, a lot of unknowns. And so I guess just to boil it down, right now, if you were a business owner or HR manager, what would you be doing?
I would jump straight onto the federal government's national strategy. Look at the first phase, which is prioritise people for vaccination. And they even use the term frontline workers. There's 678,000 of those identified. And I would be having those very serious discussions right now if you employ people in those industries and one's aged care to say, we've decided we will mandate this. Because under the Safety Act, we feel that we're fulfilling our fiduciary responsibility because you are exposed. You're in a sector that's exposed. If it's any other sector, and it doesn't have supporting medical information and other associated, safety information to show that their environment is exacerbated and at risk, and you need to show evidence of, look, that blew out in the meat industry, or yes, childcare is one where there's, they're exposed to vulnerable people, which is generally the elderly and children. I would be strongly considering mandating vaccinations there when the time comes. So, for instance, you've got to also factor in, if you're mandating yourself internally, but you're not on that 1B list, might not even be available for 3 or 6 months. You don't know. Then anyone outside of that, I would say I wouldn't mandate it, because there's no evidence to support that they are at extra risk. And additionally, even if we go ahead and vaccinate 42% of the population, so everyone's employed, you're not going to achieve herd immunity or anything remotely close to it that's needed for, as when you look at historical eradication programs where it's got to be 80 or 90%. So I think would be an unnecessary mandate for those workers.
And so when you say, that word mandate, I mean, there still is the option to invite employees to come for vaccinations, right?
Totally. So I'm self-employed, for instance. And once I've seen the first round of mass testing and results to show that there isn't any major complications, and they've clearly defined who's an exception, because I get asthma. Right. And of course, COVID-19 manifests itself in your lungs. So I need to make sure I'm not on that risk. On that list. And the conversion rate from the vaccine into the virus is acceptably low. I'll be one of the first people to volunteer.
Right.
And you've also picked that herd immunity.
Got it. So just to summarise there, what we're saying here is, number one, figure out if your people are on the list. Figure out if the people that you employ are on that list that would justify mandating it. And if they're not, hold tight until the government comes through with further guidance.
Yeah, and I would certainly start connecting with the appropriate professionals and professional bodies representing the sectors you should be engaging with for the expertise on applying this to your workplace. So for the safety legislation, I would only be going to Safety Institute of Australia,
Yep.
in addition to the other references that we meant for the application of it and how to look for the right professional to do a safety risk assessment internally, especially if you're a HR manager. And for anything inside the Fair Work Act, I would be looking for a appropriately qualified and experienced Fair Work professional, which basically means they've got to have, so not a Bachelor of Laws, because you can have that and have 0 units or education in employment law, but I would strongly be looking at people with industrial relations, employment relations degrees.
So this information, I guess it is pretty hot off the press, but then at the same time, how long do you think this information that we're giving out is going to be valid for?
And that's another really good point. So if you're watching this and looking at the guide in a month's time, I would actually say there's everything in here you need to recheck for its currency.
Yeah.
Particularly information from the government. So that national vaccine strategy is off the Department of Health website. And I would hope that within a month, maybe 2 months, the government will have made a decision on whether they're mandating it, in addition to the herd immunity target should be picked. And perhaps who's prioritised for immunisation, that list may evolve further from just frontline workers to other that are recommended for whatever reason.
Yep. So, any other obvious things that you'd recommend people just steer clear of?
Not really. Look, I would say just try and make evidence-based informed decisions as to what course of action you want to take. Now, I know that's quite lengthy, but don't take my word for it. Take the word of all the links and information that I've put together in front of you to form your own picture and way forward. The only last thing I would probably say is just really think through before you do go down a path of dismissal.
Yeah.
Is this really productive for you? Is it productive for the employee?
And
I would argue, even in the case of those people that are at the 1B list, if they don't really want to do it, I generally probably wouldn't be forcing the issue at this point. Unless, as I said, I think it's a wider issue that the government needs to resolve. It shouldn't be left up to employers and employees to carry that burden.
Got it. So don't poke the bear, as we say, until we get some proper guidance from up on high.
Yeah, that's right.
Great, mate. All right. Well, thanks for the information. Is there any other last ideas? Anything else you want to cover off on?
No, really, that's about it, mate. Perhaps what we could do and look at is another update in a month if there is significant change or update in this space. Yeah,
well, I think that's going to be the place, right? I mean, so to everybody watching, watch this space because things will evolve quickly as we go along. So look, thanks for chatting, mate. And to everyone watching, hope this is helpful and informative for you. And by all means, if you need more advice on this, hit up Ciaran. He works at hrsafe. So we didn't even go through your credentials, sir, but you're pretty deeply embedded in a lot of the policy and what have you with Fair Work and all the rest. Do you want to what are some of the things that you're working on right now?
Look, we're looking at various different kind of initiatives nationally to help with the framework of the Fair Work Act that unfortunately it suffers from a lack of.
Right.
And we've been leaving too much of the work up to the regulators and the Commission. So we're looking at expanding that framework to help in a lot of other different ways. Same sort of way that safety has. Safety's got a strategy. Safety's got data. Safety has other professions and professional benchmarking. We don't have that in employment relations and Fair Work. So I'm a part of a couple of different initiatives with that. But when that's formal and I can talk more about it.
Good. All right. That's another thing to look forward to, mate. Thanks for your time today. Have a great Friday.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, mate.